start by mentioning a little bit about your background and what it is that you're doing currently.
Oh, well, I am, my background is in industrial organizational psychology. That's what my graduate degrees are in. And right now I am serving as the interim dean of the Craig School of Business at California State University, Fresno.
You began studying this 24/7, you're always on tap when the boss wants to find you issue back in the days when even cell phones were kind of new. Tell us about it, and tell us also how it has changed in the last several months.
Well, when I first started looking into this area, it was a novelty to have access to a cell phone, let alone your email. So in fact, it was the early 2000s, and back then people had Blackberries. So when I first started studying it, it was a choice that workers made, and it was a, a status symbol, if you will, in terms of whether you had a Blackberry and whether you might access it at unusual hours. So when we began, so me and my common co-author, Wendy Boswell, it was really a unique research area. Now, over the past 15 years, smartphones in particular have become prolific. Everyone has a smartphone. It's unusual not to have a smartphone, if you will. And over the past 2 months, or since mid-March, now so many people are working remotely, have joined the teleworking workforce, if you will, and are navigating that really challenging boundary between work and family, or work and home, if you will.
In fact, the family often becomes part of the work, whether you want them to be part of it or not, it seems.
They do. Sometimes they show up. They make cameo appearances in your Zoom calls, or you can hear some background noise of kids playing or spouses singing. However, they might start to permeate your work world.
That's either good or bad. The kids are going to get a taste of what mom and dad have to go through, I guess, more than they may wish.
Exactly. It's I think, and in speaking to some of my colleagues with small children, that is one of the things they mentioned is it's hard to explain to their children, I have a meeting now, or I'm at work now, because of course they're at home, and they may be wearing their home clothes, and they don't associate those two together. So I think parents are having some challenging conversations, especially with younger children.
Most of our listeners and viewers are in management in some form or another. What should managers do? How quickly should they hit the button to call the guy when it's really kind of after hours?
That is an excellent question. I think our managers, our supervisors really hold the key to helping our staff navigate work-life balance. So before picking up that cell phone and sending a text or sending an email, give some thought to how is this email going to be received. Uh, so especially if you are texting or emailing after hours, be really careful about the communication. So sometimes we might send an email off really quickly because we can, but how might that message be perceived? So if you send a message, I'd like to talk to you Monday morning, and it's Friday night, that might generate quite a bit of anxiety when someone receives that. It might be that you just want to talk about a new project or something exciting, but they might assume that there's some bad news on the way, and they have all weekend to ruminate about it.
Nothing like putting the stew on the stove for 3 days, I guess.
Exactly.
Now, from the other point of view, you're the worker bee, and the boss keeps pinging you. When do you say, "Hey, that's enough. I've got a life, don't I?"
Well, and that is a little bit more challenging. I would encourage people to establish boundaries for and how they like to be contacted after hours and under what conditions, and to communicate them. So certainly I have noticed that I have some staff and some faculty who are unlikely to respond in the evening or over the weekend, and I pick up on that, and I respect that. So I'm even more careful when I do send an email. If it's after hours, I'm careful that it's really a time sensitive issue. It's something that they really do need to know. rather than just keeping up with my work and getting things off my to-do list. You need to pay attention to how that's going to affect the person receiving it. But that is a challenge as someone who might be reporting to a supervisor who doesn't respect boundaries or doesn't think boundaries are an important part of the job.
Especially for the boss who works 24/7, never seems to sleep. How do they do that? You sometimes wonder. Where you have looked backwards, essentially 15 years to where all this nonsense began. Look ahead. Where will we be when we emerge from our hidey holes, so to speak, and get back to whatever is the new normal 6 months, 12 months down the road?
Well, I think you're stealing my future research ideas. So no, I'm really fascinated by this. When we first started studying this in the early 2000s, we really noticed that there's a difference among people in terms of how much they prefer to keep their work and their non-work lives separate. So we make a distinction between integrators, those who approach time as all purpose, time and space as all purpose. They'll slip back and forth between their work roles and their non-work roles readily and easily and seem to like that. And then there are segmenters, and segmenters like to keep them separate. And when they do intersect, they have a stronger negative reaction to interruptions. It's more difficult for them to switch from a home role, say eating dinner with your family, and then you get interrupted by a text. They're going to have a harder time. It's going to take them longer to get out of their family role, go back into that work role, respond to whatever the issue is, and then disconnect from that and go back. So we do have these preferences, and that we have found consistently over the past 15 years that individuals' preferences for segmentation versus integration really affect how they respond to those interruptions, if you will, from their supervisor, or how they respond to receiving an email from a coworker. Now, with the proliferation of smartphones, I'm curious as to whether some of those distinctions are starting to go away. If we have all become accustomed to having to integrate our work and our non-work, especially under these current conditions where 24/7 we're at home and we're at work. So can we be afforded that distinction? I hope we can, because the research suggests that when we do have a break, when we completely disconnect from work, we do much better. We're a better worker, we're more productive if we take real breaks, if we actually separate ourselves, just turn off the cell phone, turn off the email, turn off your brain, so you're not ruminating. We actually do better. When we come back to work, we're more productive. If we're always working, we actually don't work as well. We get less done if we're always working. So I don't know. I don't know how we're going to respond after this situation, if we will be able to collectively disconnect.
And it might lead to new work rules imposed by the government and stuff like that.
It might. Other countries have done that. So France has imposed such restrictions that prevent supervisors and organizations from contacting employees after hours, with some success. And there are some organizations in the US that have voluntarily issued such types of policies because they've read the research. They know that actually you're going to have a more productive, healthier workforce if they disconnect. When we disconnect, our brain recharges, our body recharges. We need that time to recuperate. So it's actually a really good business decision to have those policies in place. But in this current situation, most organizations didn't have time to think about that, right? And develop those policies. We're all scrambling to adjust to the new situation.
Now, before we disconnect, what would you like to add that we haven't had a chance to talk about?
One thing I would like to add, I think, is some suggestions for especially these current times. If you find yourself doing your work in your home setting, give some thought to how you can set boundaries at home. So think about time and think about space. It might be that you are fortunate to have a home office, and that can be where you do your work. But otherwise, designate a corner of the living room or a corner of the kitchen, and treat that as your workspace so that you can demarcate it. Also, set boundaries in terms of time so that you're not constantly checking one more email or responding to one more text. And think about your routines. When we first shifted to remote work, you probably heard a number of people saying, "Yay, I get to wear my pajamas." Well, here's the thing: when you wear your pajamas, you start to maybe not like those pajamas when you're working. So think about how those routines. We find routines really they reinforce our roles. And so if you normally dress up for work, then continue to dress up for work from home, or make some kind of distinction between your non-work. And also think about transitions. Another recommendation is you normally use your commute time to get your mind into work, to get ready for the day. Use another kind of transition if you're working from home. Walk around the block before you start your work day. And then at the end of the workday, walk around the block so you can decompress and you can start your non-work life fresh and ready. So it's symbolic, but it also, it addresses that it does take time and energy and mental effort to disconnect from different parts of our lives and to get ready for the next part.